Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Vance Taylor, and I serve as the Chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services, CalOES. On behalf of the Symposium organizing team, I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 2023 National Access and Functional Needs Symposium. This is actually the second year that we've put on the symposium. And I'm delighted to report that as of this morning, we had over 2,600 people registered to tune in. So this year's event has even more participants than we did last year. But before we kick things off, Sadie Martinez, who, along with being one of the symposium organizers, is also the Access and Functional Needs Coordinator at the Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. It's going to provide an overview of the accessibility features that are available throughout the event. Sadie?
Hello all, thank you for joining us all. Before we get started, we're actually going to start with a language inclusion and justice statement. So I'm going to ask our Spanish interpreters to please unmute and go ahead and get us kicked off before we do our inclusive meetings practices.
Thank you, Sadie. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, but depending where you are. My name is Maria Elisa Fuller, and I'm here with my colleague, Valentina. We are part of an amazing group of individuals. We come from representing the Community Language Co-op. The mission is to generate a pragmatic attitude towards diversity. We focus our efforts in creating spaces that are safe for all individuals, and we continue to rally for language justice. We're very committed to creating spaces that allow each individual the right to express themselves in the language of their heart. By doing so, we're very confident to be part of conversations whose outcomes can benefit all the participants. For today, we are going to be using simultaneously interpretation to create this space. So when I finish saying this in Spanish, we are going to turn on interpretation, and you will see a globe icon in the bottom of the screen that says interpretation. So we're going to ask you to please select the channel that you prefer. If you're bilingual, feel free to listen to everybody in their own language, so you don't have to select a channel. Buenos días, buenas tardes con todos. Mi nombre es María Elisa Fuller. Estoy aquí con mi colega Valentina. Somos parte del Community Language Co-op, un grupo muy comprometido de individuos cuya misión es generar una actitud pragmática hacia la diversidad. Centramos nuestros esfuerzos en crear espacios seguros para todas las personas, mientras continuamos movilizándonos a favor de la justicia lingüística. Estamos comprometidos en crear espacios que permitan a cada individuo la oportunidad de comunicarse en el lenguaje de su corazón. Al hacerlo, pues confiamos ser testigos de conversaciones que sean beneficiosas para todos los participantes en las diferentes reuniones. Para el día de hoy utilizaremos la interpretación simultánea para crear este espacio. Cuando yo termine de anunciar esto en español, vamos a activar la interpretación y usted verá un icono de globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de su pantalla que dice interpretación. Si usted es totalmente bilingüe, puede escuchar a todos en su idioma. Si no lo es, le pedimos que por favor escoja el canal de su preferencia, sea este inglés o español. Lo que quería recordarles, por favor, a quienes van a estar presentando es que mantengan un ritmo cómodo, como de conversación, para permitirnos a Valentina, a mí y a los otros intérpretes hacer una mejor servicio. I just wanted to remind you, for those who are going to be presenting today, to please keep a comfortable rhythm while you speak to allow us interpreters to do a better job. That is all I have. Sadie, es todo lo que tengo. We are ready to start. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving us our language inclusion statement. We all strive to ensure inclusive, accessible meetings that enable all individuals to engage fully. Practicing inclusion is worth the time it may take, even if it delays other objectives. Understand that everyone exists in spaces in different ways, and how someone can best engage and listen might look different than how you do. For those of you who might benefit from captioning, please turn on and enable the CC icon at the bottom of your screen, or follow the live stream link that is in the chat for the transcript. American Sign Language interpreters are available throughout the symposium, and you could spotlight or pin the interpreters. We also have it where you could select the language at the bottom where you could select your ASL interpreter as well. And for those of you who might have questions, please put them in the Q&A box, or as an alternative format, please email them to oafn@caloes.ca.gov. So we could try to answer all of the questions. Identify who you were referring your question to, and feel free to use the email in case you have something we did not cover in this discussion. Thank you. We want you to walk away with something from this symposium that you can use in your work of whole community inclusion and emergency management. It may start with practicing inclusive meeting practices. And for more information, I will drop into the chat a link for more inclusive meeting practices. Please feel free to take breaks as you need them. There are no scheduled breaks. With that, back to you, Vance.
All right, Sadie, thank you very much. And thank you to our ASL and our Spanish language interpreters. So over the course of the next 2 days, we're going to hear about real life practices and initiatives that emergency managers, government agencies, local jurisdictions, community-based organizations, and whole community stakeholders are using to integrate the needs of all individuals before, during, and after disasters. The goal of this symposium is to provide a forum that exclusively focuses on various aspects related to the integration of access and functional needs within emergency management. The stories and discussions that are shared in the next 2 days should serve as a guide for all jurisdictions throughout the country, and we've got some international participants as well, to advance the mission of integration. I want to say, making the symposium a reality is a monumental lift. And so it's important that we take just a moment to recognize our organizers. At Cal OES, I could not be more proud to work at an agency that is so deeply rooted in the principles of integration and inclusion. But our leadership, from Governor Newsom to our director, Nancy Ward, I'm empowered California to become a real leader in this space. The Colorado Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Recognizing the need to further integration and inclusion, Colorado took a huge leap forward, then brought on Sadie Martinez to lead their efforts as their AFN coordinator. Her support and partnership organizing the event have been invaluable. New York University, they're committed to improving the safety, independence, and security of all students. And to do that at a whole new level, they brought on the innovative Anne-Marie McLaughlin as their Director of Emergency Management and Continuity. And her contributions to the symposium, including letting us use NYU's Zoom platform, have been tremendous. And the International Association of Emergency Managers. Working with their team has been wonderful. John Osborne, Raid Tesfagi, Tim Mann, they've been wizards at building the registration platforms, developing the online tools, and creating marketing materials that have helped giving this symposium life. And I want to recognize our sponsors. The American Red Cross, thank you for being a champion for the whole community. And Big City Emergency Managers. Ron Prater and his team are changing emergency management one big city at a time. Thank you for your efforts and for your sponsorship. I also want to thank panelists, moderators, and speakers. And certainly, not least of all, I want to thank you, the participants. There's a lot of places you could be right now, and you're choosing to be here. So thank you for that. Now, our keynote speaker this morning was scheduled to be Director Nancy Ward from Cal OES. Unfortunately, Director Ward's under the weather today and is unable to join us. but we're going to wish her a speedy recovery. I will take a moment of personal privilege to say that having worked closely with her and seen her commitment to inclusion and integration, Director Ward's a champion for a whole community. And I could not be more proud to work with her on this mission. Fortunately for us, she's arranged to have the Chief Deputy Director of Cal OES, Lisa Monget, fill in for her. Governor Newsom appointed Lisa Monget to serve as Chief Deputy Director at Cal OES in September 2020. And since joining the agency, she's led efforts to design and execute several initiatives focused on strengthening California's resiliency. I will say she's also responsible for the establishment of the first ever Cal OES Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She's also the reason why we have a permanent team of emergency managers dedicated to support our California State Operations Center and new inclusive programs designed to aid the recovery of communities impacted by disasters. She has decades of distinguished experience in public service and got here just in the nick of time to help us with COVID, record snowfall, record rain, record flooding, and the aftermath of some very large earthquakes. So I think all she's waiting for now are locusts. Her professional and personal commitment to inclusion and integration speaks directly to California's commitment to this issue. With that, I have the great privilege of turning it over to Chief Deputy Director Lisa Monget. Lisa.
Thank you, Vance. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Monget, Chief Deputy Director here at the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. We also serve as the Homeland Security Advisor to the Governor, Governor Gavin Newsom, and I'm honored to be with you here today. Director Ward would be very grumpy with me if I didn't pass on her disappointment, because she's very passionate about the work that you do. Since being appointed at the beginning of this year, and watching her in action with regard to the storms, the floods, and all of the events and challenges that we've been faced. First and foremost, she wants to put people first, and she always challenges the team to think about whether we're really leaning in through our partnerships and collectively thinking about the people that we're striving to serve. Vance's introduction and the comment about locusts reminded me of a family gathering that we had a couple of weekends ago, and my little niece, who was in elementary school, was asking me to describe what I do and what is emergency management in the state of California. And my 22-year-old daughter tried to describe it that, look, if there was a zombie apocalypse, we would be at the forefront of coordinating and planning the state's efforts. And that made the light bulb go off for my niece. So that Vance's comment about locusts kind of reminded me of that. First, I'd like to echo all of Vance's comments about all of the collective work that you did to make this happen. Having worked behind the scenes to make these types of events happen, I absolutely know all of the work that it takes to make it look seamless and easy. And thanks to all of you for showing up. As Chief Deputy Director, I'm honored to be a leader in an agency where the principles of equity, inclusion, and social justice are very much at the core of our work. And this month, we recognize the 33rd anniversary of the enactment of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, I was born in 1969, and it always amazes me that I was 21 years old before the federal law would recognize and prohibit the discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of life. And as we will end up recognizing that very important milestone this month, It's also imperative for all of us to acknowledge that there's a lot more work to be done. And I know that you recognize that, or you wouldn't all be here today. You're doing your part by sharing your dedication, enthusiasm, and commitment that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are central to our core values in the profession of emergency management. In California, we work hard to be the national leader in this space, but we don't do it alone, as you can see by the convening here today. It requires the commitment of our governor, of dedicated statewide leadership, partner agencies, and an active, dedicated stakeholder group. Now let's talk about California. Brief. We're big. We're nearing 40 million people in the state of California. We're one of the most diverse in this nation. We're the fourth largest economy in the world. And on the landscape disaster, simply put, we have entered a new chapter of emergency management. Our disasters are more frequent. They're on a larger scale. They're complex, and they're longer lasting. Emergencies and disasters, they involve multiple counties and regions of the state, and the recoveries for our communities are so much more challenging, and they're taking much longer time. Over the past 5 years, the state has experienced an unprecedented number of disasters, including severe drought, catastrophic wildfires, power grid outage challenges, earthquakes, intensive storms, severe flooding, and COVID-19. In fact, 15 of the most destructive fires in the past history have occurred since 2015, and 5 of the top 6 most destructive fires in the state's history occurred in August and September of 2020. California will be recovering from these disasters for the next decade while we continue to prepare, plan, and recover from future events. And something that I think all of you know with absolute certainty is that all of these disasters disproportionately impact older adults, people with disabilities, and underrepresented communities. Now more than ever, we really seek to align our efforts to support these communities. And let's take a look at some of the things that we've done in California that we're particularly proud of. And I'm hoping that across the time that we share together during this event, that we learn even more about a lot of the amazing things that you folks are doing. To address the inequities, California leaned forward and established the nation's first ever Office of Access and Functional Needs, also known as OAFN, within CalOES in 2008. And having a governor-appointed chief leader that oversees this organization ensures that we've got a decision maker representing the community sitting at the table when we're designing our plans and our responses and our recovery. Vance Taylor has fulfilled that role at CalOES spectacularly since his appointment in 2015. Continuing to make progress in the state, I'm pleased to announce that Governor Newsom established the first ever Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in CalOES in 2021. Also led by a governor appointee, this newly established office furthers the work in the equity space and collaborates very closely with Vance and his team. We challenge ourselves every day to design people-focused solutions. We work with emergency managers, the whole community, private sector stakeholders to identify and integrate the needs of all Californians throughout every facet of the state's emergency management system. And at CalOES, we strive to exemplify inclusive, integrated planning and celebrating the community's motto that nothing about us without us. And we strive to be thoughtful about our emergency communications and committed to ensure everyone can receive accessible, real-time information about disasters needed to plan, prepare, respond, and recover from all hazards. We're proud of the many projects underway, and some of them include that we've created the alert and warning guidelines in 2018 to ensure emergency notifications can be sent and received with accessibility in mind. They were created using an integrated process, meaning we included representatives from the access and functional needs community, making sure that they have a voice in the process at all times. The resulting guidelines detail, include, and convey AFN-related considerations, best practices, and responsibilities that highlight and increase risk of harm that delays in alerting can have on an entire community. The guidelines call for alerts using accessible formats, multiple languages, and plain verbiage at a 4th grade level to ensure comprehension. They also stress the importance of having alerting authorities consider the needs of those individuals in the community. And we use our robust network of trusted messengers, CBOs, and nonprofits to push out these life-saving messages. We also established the first in the nation disaster response interpreter program, DRI, with our programs partners from the deaf and hard of hearing community. This program credentials American Sign Language interpreters to provide services at shelters, town halls, press conferences, and community events during emergencies, and standardizes the practice of having on-screen interpreting at all statewide press forums. At the request of our sister emergency management agencies in various parts of the country, we have worked tirelessly with them to set up programs in their areas. We also prioritize interpreter and translation services. We contract and coordinate services for foreign language interpreters, translators, and transcription throughout California before, during, and after disasters to minimize or eliminate language barriers during emergencies. One of the most significant examples of this is when in early 2021, Cal stood up 2 of the nation's first state and federally run type 1 mass vaccination sites capable of delivering over 10,000 shots per day. These sites delivered over 800,000 vaccinations with the help of more than 15 federal, state, local, and non-governmental partners and nearly 2,700 staff. We established the sites to be physically and programmatically accessible so members of the community from all backgrounds could receive the life-saving services we were providing. And a translation tent was set up next to the vaccination areas, and whenever a constituent required translation services, assistance was requested via radio to the tent. Once the language was identified, a representative was transported to the location and then stayed with the constituent, providing translation services until their vaccination was complete, seeing them through the entire process. We play a key role in maintaining 508 compliance and understand that the information we provide online and electronically needs to be accessible for the state's whole community. To ensure our team develops and maintains the capability to create 508 compliance projects, Cal OES delivers monthly in-house training for emergency managers across the state on laws and techniques that enable effective communication of electronic information. We facilitate monthly courses, further amplifying the message and the importance of website accessibility, document conversion, and all things related to 508 compliance. Through our Office of Access and Functional Needs, we provide subject matter experts to support the effort and to make sure that there is a voice from the community at the table. We use technology to support video remote interpreting. During disasters, they're an easy-to-use, convenient, and on-demand American Sign Language interpreting service delivered over a live internet video connection reaching smartphones and tablets. We prioritize integrated sheltering because individuals with access or functional considerations should always feel comfortable and confident coming to our shelters. We work with partners such as the California Department of Social Services, the American Red Cross, independent living centers, local emergency managers, CBOs, and stakeholders throughout the state to ensure shelters are physically and programmatically accessible for all Californians. We integrate specialized dietary considerations, accessible portable showers, hand washing stations, and comfort stations into shelter operations. We also provide accessible cots, support individuals with assistance to address activities of daily living, and strive to ensure that folks have access to wraparound services. We established the CalOES statewide AFN Community Advisory Committee to further support the principle of integrated planning and inclusion. This committee is comprised of executive leaders from community-based organizations and state agencies. The committee provides subject matter expertise who assist us in identifying unmet needs, partner with us on the development of preparedness resources and innovative projects, and provide us with the key insights on upcoming and unforeseen issues impacting the communities. And we support statewide AFN leadership calls, which are so critical. During major events, CalOES brings community stakeholders together to participate in state AFN leadership coordination calls to discuss response and recovery efforts. American Sign Language and captioning services are also provided. Briefings often include messaging from the National Weather Service, the California Utilities Emergency Association, FEMA, the California Department of Social Services, the American Red Cross, and the CalOES Debris and Removal Team, CBOs, and the CalOES non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations office, and others. This year in particular, hearkening back to my earlier comments about the focus of Director Board, we established the Priority Populations Task Force. This is a new key initiative. California operationalized for the first time during the December and January storms. This task force coordinates all state resources in support of individuals with disabilities, older adults, people experiencing homelessness, people with chronic conditions, and migrant communities. The task force develops and disseminates messaging to local and community partners and provides information regarding state and federal resources for priority populations. It also convenes state, local, and county government partners to provide real-time technical assistance and engage priority populations, support community planning efforts, and coordinating stakeholder requests. The goal of the task force is to ensure that no communities are left behind, fall through the cracks, and otherwise do not receive the services they require and deserve during this incredibly large scope of major disaster response and recovery. The task force also, the members traveled around the state during the event and during the recovery of the event to ensure that we put eyes ourselves on the support, or in some cases, the lack of support, and when we needed to course correct. And that allowed us to swiftly take action and change direction to better support these communities from headquarters in Sacramento. So in closing, I'd like to say that California is committed to setting the standard for whole community planning and integration of accessible communication, sheltering, and transportation. And while we are proud of our collective accomplishments, much work is left to be done. The commitment begins with leadership from the government and spreads through every state agency and every local government jurisdiction. And sharing our recent accomplishments with you, one thing is common to each initiative, and that is that government does not do it alone. And we actually do our best work when we work in tandem, side by side, in partnership with trusted messengers and the whole community. In our work as emergency managers, I often think of a proverb that my mother used to share with my sister and I when we were very young. And it's that if you want to go fast, you go alone. And if you want to go far, you go together. And I think that that philosophy captures the work that we do as emergency managers and the collective work that all of you folks do. And my sense is that you recognize that and you live by that philosophy. Otherwise, you wouldn't have joined this event. So with that, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to speak to all of you. I hope that you continue to be fearless warriors in your work, and that you find this gathering re-energizes you, because I know your work can be tiresome at times. But I hope that you know you're making a difference, that your work is meaningful, and I hope that you're re-energized. I want to thank all of the participants, most importantly, and then all of the people behind the scenes that made this work, the sponsors, Vance, you and your leadership, and the rest of the team. And I want to thank you for your interest and your work in this field, because it's truly life-saving work. And quite frankly, it's long overdue. So with that, I just want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Appreciate your remarks and appreciate, again, just that ongoing commitment and modeling the way. So thank you very much. We have a really great rest of our lineup for this morning. Well, I guess depending on where you're at, could be afternoon. But one of the things that I got to do, I was lucky enough to draw the long straw and get to moderate our first panel. And the topic for our first panel is getting out safely, planning for successful emergency evacuation outcomes. The aim is to empower local jurisdictions and individuals with access and functional needs to develop comprehensive, inclusive emergency evacuation plans that work for the whole community, right? Ensuring that individuals with access and functional needs are able to evacuate their homes safely before, during, and after disasters is essential, but it doesn't happen without proper planning. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, working with us, we've got some panelists. I want to read just some bios, and then I'm going to ask that they come on and share. Thank you, Heather and Jeff, for being here, and Sanan, if you want to join us too. Heather Lafferty is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and the Access and Functions Coordinator at the Nevada Division of Emergency Management. She's a member of the Nevada Resilience Advisory Committee. And while there, she advocates and supports the incorporation and consideration of individuals with disabilities and people with access and functional needs throughout every phase of emergency management. Heather is a grassroots scholar in disability and advocacy, and she's the co-creator of the Nevada Access and Functional Needs Working Group. We're also joined by Sanan Khan. Sanan is the Associate Director for the Los Angeles County of Emergency Management. In that capacity, Sanan's responsible for overseeing readiness for the County Emergency Operations Center. Also, all the training and exercises that happen for operational areas, and management of emergency management grants and integration of plans with operational area partners. In his previous role, Sanan served as the operational integration supervisor and the access and functional needs coordinator for the LA County Office of Emergency Services. And our third panelist is Jeff Tom. Jeff graduated from Stanford Law and worked as an attorney for the California legislature for 30 years. He's a past president of the California Council of the Blind and former vice president of the American Council of the Blind. He served in a variety of blindness-related capacities and done so at the national, state, and local levels, including as a board member of the American Foundation for the Blind and as past president for Disability Rights California and the Alliance on Aging and Vision Loss. Jeff is a recipient of the 2008 California Public Lawyer of the Year Award. So, very distinguished panel. Thank you all for being with us today. I think what we're going to do here to start it out is we'll go Heather, Sanan, and Jeff. We'll each take about 5 minutes to talk, and then we'll just do some Q&A and have a good dialogue. So Heather, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you, Vance, for including a rural and frontier state like Nevada in this important discussion around getting out safely. As Vance mentioned, I am Heather Lafferty. I am a white woman with brown hair wearing a blue blouse and an orange sweater. My pronouns are she, her. You know, one thing, Vance, I'm sure you know about emergency managers is we love a good PowerPoint. So it's refreshing, and I'm excited today to get to engage with you and my fellow panelists in a genuine conversation around this important topic. You know, look, as I mentioned, Nevada is primarily a rural and frontier state with over 28 tribal nations. You know, and many of our communities, we begin the disaster cycle underserved and under-resourced, you know, but you're still expected to rise and provide that same level of services and emergency response, you know, as our suburban and urban counterparts, you know, but you're doing it with much smaller budgets and resources and over a much bigger geographic area, you know, and when you factor into that the historic and systemic, you know, exclusion in emergency planning for people with disabilities and access and functional needs, you can really start to see the layers of inequity develop, which really shines a spotlight on some of those gaps that we're still seeing even today, you know, which directly results in, you know, a greater risk of injury and death during a crisis, unfortunately. You know, but before we get too deep into our discussion today, I did want to give you a quick snapshot of what the continuous disaster cycle of 2023 has really looked like here in Nevada. You know, we were just a few hours into our New Year's Eve celebrations when the first atmospheric river event hit northern Nevada, and it dumped an unprecedented amount of snow, knocking out power in some cases in places for up to 3 to 4 days. Then almost immediately we were hit with the second atmospheric river, and we saw, you know, pretty heavy snow impacts in northern Nevada and significant flooding in southern Nevada. And we became very concerned around our dams and possible dam failures. And then, you know, as we were continuing through January, February, and March, you know, our April showers did bring May flowers, but they also brought more flooding. Then the desert sun started to heat up, and you know, now all of that snowpack is melting. So we've entered spring, fall, and we're seeing more significant flooding, you know, but throughout these events, we saw significant impacts, isolation, damage, interrupted services to our underserved, you know, frontier and rural tribal communities. We had memory care facilities and assisted living centers, you know, lose power. We were very concerned about having to possibly evacuate some of our rural hospitals and long-term care facilities. And we were particularly concerned also at one point about a camp for juvenile clients of Nevada's justice system and possible evacuations there. You know, our Walker River Paiute tribe is still actively responding to flooding events. And at one point, our Yamba Shoshone tribe, you know, was completely cut off from evacuation and supply routes in and out of their community. So for Nevadans, it's not a question of, you know, if you're going to be impacted by disaster, but when. Even as we begin this conversation right now, my emergency managers in Southern Nevada, are really focusing in on these excessive heat warnings, because we know, on this call in particular, that heat disproportionately impacts and affects people with disabilities and access and functional needs. So I'm very excited to get to join everybody today as we kind of hash through some of these best practices for evacuation and planning with the disability community. Thank you, Vance.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather. Sanan, let's turn it over to you.
So, morning, everyone. Vance, thank you for the opportunity for being here this morning. I'm Sanan Khan. I serve as the Associate Director for LA County Office of Emergency Management. LA County, small town, 4,000 square miles. I know everyone thinks a big county, more resources, big county, more disagreements, more issues and coordination. LA County has a population of around 10 million people. A underestimate based on our census really is an AFN population around 25%. 25% of 10 million, which we know is an underestimate, is still a lot of people. Prior to my current position, I served as the Access and Functional Needs Coordinator for LA County. I have to say, by far the best job I have ever had, just based on the relationships that we built with our AFN community partners. Yeah, in the beginning, there were disagreements, there were differences of opinion, but at the end, it led to just a fantastic collaborative process. A lot of issues in LA County, and I mean, emergencies transition over time, right? When I say a lot of issues, what I mean is we were planning for drought, and then it was just nonstop rain and massive issues with potential thaw of the snow and the ice packs. So the transition in planning really needs emergency managers, our community partners, our stakeholders, as well as our community to be very, very reactive and adaptive to the changes that are coming our way. So I'm just going to keep it short for that opening comment because I know there are some amazing discussion questions coming. So Vance, back to you.
Go ahead. Thank you, Sanan. Jeff, let's turn it over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here today. Thank you, Vance, for this opportunity. I don't have the incredible level of expertise of my two amazing colleagues, but I come to you with lived experience as a person with a disability, in my case, vision loss. And having been part of the process of providing advice in California on county plans, I can say it's truly been an incredible experience, and I have learned more than I have given, I think. I think it's fair to say that every level of every part of the planning process, whether it's hazard mitigation, emergency notifications, evacuations, shelter services or reentry, provides specific issues for people with access and functional needs. For those of us in the access and functional needs community, depending upon one's individual circumstances, including one's living situation and safety net, some components may be more important than others, or at least provide a heightened level of concern. For example, a deaf or hard of hearing person may have issues with emergency notifications, both in terms of prior to the disaster and being provided with information at shelters. A deaf and hard of hearing person may also have an inability to evacuate on their own. Similarly, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have issues with notification and evacuation as well. They may be able to be provided with information through their own living situations, or they may not. As a blind person, I too have issues in the various segments of the emergency operations plan. I think I am fairly able to obtain emergency notifications through the various sources that we have nowadays, although nothing is certain. I certainly have issues in the process of shelter services with respect to making sure that I have all the information that is posted in written fashion, with respect that I know how to get around the shelter, and some other issues. But I think that for me, the issue that I'm going to focus on today, and I'll tell you why in a second, is the evacuation component. And there's two main reasons. One is personal. I have 5 children. 3 of them live far away from me, and they're obviously not going to be of any help to my wife and I, who are both blind, to evacuate. One lives fairly close to me, but she happens to have 2 minor children, and her first responsibility is obviously to evacuate her family. The final one has no minor children, but she does have 2 adult children in the household. And it is really uncertain as to whether she would be able to evacuate my wife and I in terms of a timely fashion, depending upon the circumstances of the emergency that might befall us. So for me, evacuation is, of course, extremely important. Moreover, the reason I'm going to focus on evacuation as we go on in our in this panel is that I think in many ways evacuation is the most complex and difficult component to get a handle on for a number of reasons. It involves a number of agencies. It involves getting estimates of the numbers of people that need to be served that are often hard to do. So it involves a large number of factors that I will elucidate as I go on. But it's a crucial element of the plan, and definitely so for people with access and functional needs, many of whom, perhaps most of whom, do not have or are transit dependent and do not have modes of transportation available to them. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. So, what I really want to do is just kind of dive in. Let's just have a dialogue here. So, Sanan, I got a question for you. I know that in your time as an emergency manager in LA County, you've tackled wildfires, storms, earthquakes, you've kind of done it all. Can you walk us through what are some of the evacuation related challenges that the county runs up against when they're trying to meet the needs of the whole community?
Yeah, absolutely, Vance. Thank you. And thank you for that question. I want to say I can actually add tornadoes to that list as well, because we did have one in Montebello. So one of the few emergency managers in LA that can say they responded to a tornado.
Tornado and probably firenadoes, right, as well.
So, we have a lot of emergencies everywhere, right? In LA County, we are under an extended heat advisory at this moment. I mean, I'm the manager on duty right now, and I can say we're one spark away from a bad day, right? We've faced challenges before. I am not going to be up here saying that, hey, LA County, things are perfect, everything is settled. We have had challenges related to emergency communication, providing robust communication in hard to reach areas during evacuations. I mean, the county is mountains, the county is canyons, the county is valleys. There are areas that are hard to get to. There are passes that are difficult to navigate day to day, let alone in an emergency when people are trying to evacuate. Getting accessible vehicles in the past was a big challenge for the county, especially in coordination with 88 cities that are in the county. I mean, trying to get everyone on board is a difficult task. The biggest solution on how we overcame these challenges, that's what I really want to focus on. And the credit to that goes to our community partners. Our community partners really stepped up to the plate, and our AFN partners specifically, our AFN stakeholders, allowed us to do a gap assessment with them at the table. Okay. This led to a much more robust outcome. For example, getting emergency evacuation notices out. We were able to deploy NOAA radios for emergency evacuation notification. That's a recommendation that really came out of our AFN group. Okay, building these robust partnerships and building an open dialogue really allowed our AFN stakeholders, AFN advocacy groups, to come to us with solutions. When it comes to evacuation itself, our partnership with Access Services, which is our paratransit provider, really became incredibly important. We were able to work with them during most incidents. They would provide vehicles to evacuate individuals. They already had a list in place. We also worked with our public health partners to get a list of individuals that were energy dependent that may need evacuation assistance. We would call them. And then the county has invested heavily in Zone Haven. Zone Haven is a system that really allowed us and the community really with critical evacuation updates, deploy resources, coordinate large-scale evacuation. I would like to say the biggest thing though is the commitment of both our AFN stakeholders and the OEM team to really empower communities. OEM undertook an initiative to empower our communities by investing in local emergency management task forces, such as the one in Topanga Canyon. These are community-led, community-run, and government agency, especially OEM, is there more as a consultant to provide support where needed. Our long-term goal in developing these communities, and our goal is to have multiple in each supervisorial districts. COVID has given us a little bit of a setback, but we're trying to reinvigorate that project. Our goal really is to have these communities be able to provide input in both planning efforts and then lead exercises, especially evacuation drills in their community. These happen every year in Topanga, and we would really like to see that expand countywide.
You know, it's interesting to hear all the different points you touched on. It seems like that common thread is the partnership between emergency managers and individuals with access and functional needs. And I love that, right? Because that partnership is something that, whether or not you've got a lot of resources or you don't have resources, if you've got that discussion and dialogue, if there's a relationship there, everything you do is going to be a better product. And Heather, that kind of got me thinking a little bit about, you talked a little bit about communities having limited access to accessible transportation. And thinking about what Sanan was saying, that they learned a lot by working with their AFN stakeholders. I know that in working with your AFN stakeholders, you're learning a lot, and emergency managers are getting a broader view of the realities of what some of those shortcomings might be on accessible transportation. Are there other examples that you're learning that maybe highlight some of the emergency evacuation challenges that people with access to functional needs face during disasters?
Yeah, absolutely, Vance. Thank you. After our first big atmospheric river event that, I discussed earlier in Northern Nevada, one of our community members reached out to me and my partner, Kimberly. She's my counterpart at the Nevada Governor's Council for Developmental Disabilities. And she wanted to meet with us both to talk about, her experience for her family during that event. She's a very active community member, but she's also a wheelchair user, and her husband is a wheelchair user, and, when that winter storm hit, they lost power and they were extremely scared and concerned about the freezing temperatures and their ability, to maintain their body temperatures. They had seen a press release go out, advertising that a warming shelter was opening, but the press release didn't have or state whether or not the warming shelter was accessible. So they were very hesitant to wait out into the winter conditions if they didn't even know they would be able to access this building, because it was a building in their community, they weren't really familiar with. This couple did have a vehicle So they did have transportation if they needed it, but they encountered some other challenges as well, such as when the power went out, their automatic garage door openers stopped working and they weren't able, to manually lift the garage door. And even if they had, the winter snow was falling so quickly and building up so rapidly, it really impeded their ability to exit their driveway. And if you haven't navigated, in a wheelchair before, you might not be aware that even 2 inches of snow can really make a path inaccessible. And I really, wanted to highlight their particular story because it's very important, emergency managers understand that planning with the disability community really strengthens our evacuation planning. And when you include them in your planning, you're going to get those lived experiences and guidance in your plans that are really going to help you build towards accessible solutions that offer an entire range and cover more than just, ramps or lifts in our public transportation. Some of the guidance and feedback you're going to get when you're planning with these communities is, do you have safety belts and wheelchair tie downs? Can people choose whether they want to be transferred, from their seats or remain in their wheelchair? Are your public transportation drivers educated on how to safely secure a wheelchair user? Do your first responders have that just-in-time training that they need to ensure they're evacuating people, with their assistive equipment? So, these are just a few things to really consider. And one of the benefits that you're going to see when you plan and actively engage these communities, especially around evacuation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Heather. Jeff, you had talked, and at one point we had discussed, I think offline, about steps that local jurisdictions should take to operationalize evacuation plans, right? And specifically, evacuation plans that address the needs of people with access and functional considerations. Any thoughts on that? Like, what steps do you think local jurisdictions should take to move forward on that front?
Yeah, I think the question that needs to be answered and can be answered when a plan is appropriately operationalized is that a person with an access and functional needs can have a general idea of how he or she will be evacuated. Obviously, no system is going to be foolproof, and you can't anticipate all the circumstances that might occur. But you should have some understanding of what may happen in your particular case. Now, this is a very complex set of variables to undertake to operationalize, as we have just heard from our prior two panelists. But first, I think you need to have a good estimate of the number of transit-dependent individuals that in the jurisdiction, and that is not easy because some jurisdictions I know use estimates of public social services recipients, but obviously this is not inclusive enough. Some use lists of paratransit individuals, but many people are either not eligible because of various reasons, or do not choose to use paratransit. So it's a complex set of circumstances, and it requires real planning throughout the jurisdiction to come up with a fairly reasonable estimate of how much you need in terms of resources to evacuate the communities within a particular jurisdiction. After that, you have to have a good analysis of the resources available for transporting the various elements of the transit-dependent population. Obviously, some people are going to need accessible vehicles, others are not. You have some that can be evacuated through congregate living arrangements, and others that are spread out through the community in individual residential settings. So you need to take a look at all that when you look at the resources you have. When you look at your resources, I think it's important not just to look at your fixed route and paratransit agencies, but also those outside your jurisdiction, because you're probably not going to have enough resources to evacuate everybody, as well as the private providers in both rural areas and urban areas. There are private providers of transportation that can be there to fill the gaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on some really key things there. And, you know, one of the things too is that notion that there's going to be more people that have to have transportation probably than there are going to be transportation resources to deploy. And I think that's when things like the outreach that you and Sanan and Heather have been talking about really factors in as well, right? Is to better understand, you know, what are the needs and how do you address those needs. I think some places have had a difficult go trying to reach out and engage with their stakeholders. I'm wondering, Heather, your program is relatively new. But I know that you've been doing a lot in terms of outreach. What advice or steps would you share or give in terms of ways to conduct outreach and ways to engage so that you can better understand and address evacuation challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I know there are probably a lot of people here today, maybe even from my rural and frontier states, who are trying to figure out, you know, how to start taking the significant steps in integration in their programs. One of the biggest first projects that we did internally here at the Nevada Division of Emergency Management, sorry, my lights are a little possessed today, I apologize, is, you know, we partnered with the DD Council, or the Nevada Governor's Council for Developmental Disabilities, to really reach out and create a coalition of disability service providers, you know, government, non-government agencies, advocacy agencies, groups, you know, led by and for individuals with disabilities and access and functional needs. And that group is called the Nevada Access and Functional Needs Disaster Coalition. You know, part of the function or role of that group is to provide the Division of Emergency Management not only direct access, you know, to our priority populations, but in reverse, we get to plan with the community educational campaigns, you know, around evacuation best practices. You know, one of the other big benefits of having this working group is I can provide, you know, real-time situational awareness to Nevada's, you know, Centers for Independent Living, caseworkers, community health nurses, child welfare caseworkers, you know, and caregivers. And I really wanted to highlight this particular planning effort and work group and outreach because, you know, like many of my rural and frontier states, you know, Nevada is not overly resourced, you know, like some of our sister states are, but that doesn't mean we can't be impactful. You know, this work group is about relationships, situational awareness, amplifying and our preparedness, education messaging, and having that direct access and incorporation, you know, and really having people that are going to be directly in charge of and responsible for evacuating our assisted living facilities and communities, you know, be in these planning process with us. You know, I was able to activate this group for the first time during one of the darkest moments in our recent disasters. And it was dark because the power was out. But to connect, you know, and coordinate with our assisted living and long-term care facilities to one, you know, make sure all of the facilities in the impacted area, you know, knew where their emergency operating plan was and how to activate it. But if they did need to evacuate, they understood those processes. You know, we were also able, through the support of our amazing Division of Aging and Disability, to share real-time information with caseworkers for Nevadans who are living independently in the impacted areas, so they could conduct welfare checks and share priority information, and all of these efforts were really just good, inclusive planning and action. So I really want to encourage you not to hesitate or think because your budget or resources are limited that limits your ability to make impacts and engage significantly with the disability and access and functional needs community in your jurisdiction or state.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to thank people. I know there's got some questions that have been submitted through the Q&A feature. And one of the things that I want to say for everybody listening on this is please submit whatever questions you have. There's no way we're going to have time to answer all of them right now. But one of the things we're going to do is whatever question comes in, after the symposium, we're going to get it answered. And then following the symposium, we'll get responses out to everybody. So even if your question doesn't get answered right now in this session, we will get a response for you. So please fill up our Q&A here and we'll make sure you get answers. Sanan, yeah, I wanted to ask, and it's kind of leans on what Heather was talking about, but kind of two things. I mean, you had all that experience running the AFN advisory committee. And what I want to know is, one, how did you build trust? Right, because I know that was a challenge. Can you talk about how you built trust? And then two, once that trust was established, how did you see that benefit the evacuation considerations or planning you were doing? So it's a two-parter.
Okay, so I would say the first part is fairly loaded. Building trust is difficult, right? But I mean, trust is important in all aspects. Think about any relationship you've had. That relationship just can't be transactional. I mean, you're not going to get anything of value out of it. And it's true. It takes forever to build trust. It takes years and years, and it can be lost in seconds, right? My recommendation to building trust would definitely be multi-pronged. There is no one way to do it. There is no one right way to do it. First one would really be reach out to your AFN community, its advocates, stakeholders, and provide them a forum, okay? This forum needs to have an open dialogue with all stakeholders, including your non-AFN stakeholders. Bring everyone to the table, okay? And don't take the message that they bring to you as criticism, okay? Think of it as gaps that have been brought to your attention, okay, that need to be filled in order to have a successful response. The other I would say is don't use your AFN stakeholders as rubber stamps to meet requirements, okay? Nothing valuable is going to come from that, okay? Don't just pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, Vance, I need your help on A. What do you think of this? Okay, don't just have a relationship where you're pinging them, you're pinging your partners just to get their ideas. I mean, it really needs to be a collaborative form. Involve them in the process, okay? Building a meaningful relationship with your partners is going to go a long way. And you can do that in multiple ways. Go to their meetings, okay? Do your AFN stakeholders always have to just come to yours? Why can't you, as an emergency manager, as an AFN stakeholder, okay, go to theirs, okay? Go to the events that community groups put up, set up time to meet their staff, set up time to understand their process. The more you invest in building a relationship with your AFN stakeholders, the more you're going to get out of it. When I was the AFN coordinator for LA County, I would have coffee meetups with my AFN stakeholder group partners. It would just be one-on-one. How are you doing? I found out one of my colleagues from Greater Los Angeles Agency of Deafness was a huge bike rider. I'm a huge bike rider. We would meet up on the weekends just to ride. I mean, building meaningful partnerships, building meaningful relationships is what you are going to be able to count on in the middle of an emergency. Okay. And all of that, 100% of it is based on trust.
That's interesting, Sanan, because you could be talking about building a relationship in terms of developing a friendship with someone. You could be talking about building a relationship of professional trust. You could be talking about a relationship with your spouse, right?
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing is put in the time, be sincere, and have two-way engagement. So yeah, all those principles still apply, and I love, by the way, what you said about don't just check a box, right? Because I think we've all experienced that, right? Where when somebody's just going through the motions, and it feels condescending, and it does not build trust.
It's insulting, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, when you talk about stakeholders, give us an example, like who are some of the stakeholders? Because I know a lot of people out there are wondering, well, this sounds great, but who do I call? Is it like a local paratransit? Is that a stakeholder?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Vance.
No, go ahead.
So paratransit is a stakeholder, but I wouldn't say that's the primary AFN stakeholder group. I'm talking more specifically about AFN advocacy groups, groups that do mental health advocacy, our independent living centers, our development disability coordinating bodies, physical disability coordinating groups, Greater Los Angeles Agency on Deafness, the Braille Institute is here in Los Angeles. So, and there is no one directory, right, where you can go and pick up or go to their website and say, oh, these are the list of all AFN stakeholder groups that are in LA County. It would be great if that existed, but it doesn't. It took a lot of searching online. It took a lot of searching on Facebook groups. It took a lot of word of mouth, where after our initial meeting, we found out from Westside Center for Independent Living shared with us that, hey, there is this amazing veterans group that supports veterans with disabilities. A lot of it can be word of mouth. Not every AFN stakeholder group is going to have a big website, is going to have a big coordinating group to reach out and work with. These are individuals who have committed their lives and to the AFN community, and there is a lot of work to do on that side, right? So you want to make sure that you reach out to these smaller groups as well. A lot of the groups that became a part of our Emergency Management Advisory Council, which was our AFN advisory group, really came to us word of mouth. They didn't have fancy websites, so don't ignore the smaller groups. Those relationships are just as important, because going back to the second part of your question, Vance, I mean, if you push out an evacuation message, right, and a trust doesn't exist, okay, that message is going to have a lower uptake. But then if you have AFN groups that re-emphasize their message, they amplify your message to their stakeholders, because they are that trusted agency, that message will have a higher uptick. Now, by that, I don't mean don't try to build trust with the community. Don't mean that at all. What I mean is you do have these stakeholders that can be very, very valuable partners to help you build that trust with the community. Okay.
Awesome, thanks, Anand. In California, a law was passed, Assembly Bill 580, that says that all the counties have to submit their emergency operation plans on their next update to OES, and what we do is we look at them and ensure that in part they're aligning not just with the laws associated with inclusion and integration, but also with best practices. And Jeff, I know that you provide a lot of value. You're on the team that works with us to look at the evacuation sections of those plans. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, having done this and looked at multiple plans, are you seeing that there's some common threads or or challenges that communities are having on the evacuation side? And if so, what kind of recommendations are you giving out?
Yeah, I think as I've stated earlier, the biggest issue from my perspective, and the one that's common to most emergency operation plans, including the evacuation annexes to those plans, is the fact that the level of detail for how evacuation procedures are going to occur really doesn't exist. LA County appears to be a model, but it is really necessary to have a high level of detail in terms of, where you're going to have what resource and applying to which population and which areas of the county. You need to have enough training drills so that people understand what is going to happen to them during an evacuation. There's very little planning in terms of making individuals understand that there are insufficient resources. And in addition to using community-based organizations, things like PSAs and social media can help people with access and functional needs and their loved ones design alternative evacuation plans for themselves to supplement the resource limitations that you have in the applicable jurisdiction. So, and finally, of course, and we've just been discussing it, we need to have more input from the access and functional needs community. And a lot of that input, when it comes from training drills themselves, can actually identify problems that no one will anticipate. And I think that these training drills should also try to apply to specific populations, because different populations will present different issues. I know that in my county, a blindness organization received a grant to do emergency preparedness education and training. And similar grants should be available to regional centers and independent living centers and mental health advocacy groups, because as I say, we need to find out the specific issues that we're going to face before the emergencies occur.
Yeah, I love that you said before they occur. Right, let's not wait for the balloon to go up. So, one of the things that I'll say, and I'm gonna put in sort of a little bit of a shameless plug here. Caloris is going to be coming out with an evacuation guidance. And I expect that that'll be released in just the next couple of weeks. And some of the things that are included in there speak directly to points that you brought up, Jeff. Right, and I'm going back to that notion about there's going to be more people that need accessible transportation than there are accessible resources to deploy. And so what we're putting out there as guidance is for jurisdictions to develop contracts with accessible transportation providers within their jurisdiction, but to then develop contracts with vendors outside of their jurisdiction as well, right? That recognition that there's going to have to be a surge capacity. And if those contracts, to your point, aren't established beforehand, it's going to impede progress during the event. The other thing that we're including in there among recommendations and guidance is to work with the AFN community and find out, how do you receive your emergency information? Right? Is it through alerting and how do you communicate with emergency management? And when it comes to evacuation specifically, to come up with a number, if you will, that people can call to get emergency evacuation assistance. right? Because what happens is we set up these contracts and we think it's all good. But then, okay, Jeff needs emergency evacuation transportation. And does Jeff know what number to call? Right? How does the end user actually take advantage of this? And rather than change the phone number every fire or every flood or every event, just have one consistent way that people can use regardless of the disaster. And then to use the AFN advisory committee to socialize that throughout the community. Right? We all know that if we call 911, that's how you get police or fire or EMS. But I doubt that many people, if anyone on this line, could tell you what number to call to get emergency evacuation assistance. Right? That needs to change. So those are some of the best practices that'll be included in that guide. Then we'll make sure it gets pushed out far and wide. I want to use that idea about best practices as a springboard, Heather, to go back to you, because I know that especially following the winter storms, that Nevada's been making a lot of progress on this issue. And what I'm wondering is if you can share with us some of the successes and maybe best practices that you're seeing in Nevada on emergency evacuation, because I think people can take a lot from it.
Yeah, absolutely, Vance. Thank you. I really can't stress enough the importance of layering and leveraging your resources and your relationships, but really take it to the max. Our DD Council, like I mentioned before, not only partners with us on our disaster coalition, but they're also in the office with me every Friday in person, helping to plan joint preparedness projects and have that direct outreach and feedback from the disability community. They're on coordination calls with me, even if it's 1 a.m. in the morning. We're involving our Centers for Independent Living and representatives from our aging and disability divisions. They really have to be in the room with you where it's happening. I'm currently working internally to kind of examine and evaluate if we need to expand our emergency support functions to officially include some of these agencies, that we just discussed. So, as we're planning and exercising and responding, they're right there with us. And having them at that emergency support level function, that piece really makes it sustainable. So even if, for instance, there was any type of budgeting issues with me or my position, you're not losing that progress. It's part of the system. And I'm not going to say any of this when you're starting a program like this, it's easy, and that it doesn't take extensive time and effort. In some cases, it is hard, but nothing is more necessary. And, since Vance, we're kind of on the topic of relationships, I did want to briefly highlight how important it is, our relationship with our sister states. During the Caldor fire, for instance, when Californians were evacuating with their families and their animals across state lines into Nevada, that really helped us identify, some internal gaps. But some of those gaps included, we didn't know our California counterparts and their processes as well as we probably should have. And that caused, some coordination challenges and delays in services. But one of the things we did together was, once that was over, we met up at the border of California and Nevada, and we really sat down and started to hash out those expectations, and start building those communications for when this happens again. And of course, with the way our wildfire seasons have expanded in California and Nevada, it will happen again. So our real gem this year was developing those resources and developing that trust and direct contacts with our disability communities here in Nevada. And it has really, really helped improve all of our evacuation planning and help kind of hone in on what we need to target and really close down on, in this next coming year and cycles.
Awesome. Thanks, Heather. So now I'm gonna come back to you and I'm gonna ask, I like giving you these two-parters, right? Keep you on your toes. So the first part of play best practices, things you've learned on this issue that you think emergency managers across the state should know. If you've got a point or two, or 12. And then the other part of that is really kind of what Heather was going to in terms of that dynamic with the community and making sure that you've got relationships with other jurisdictions. LA County is huge. A lot of people come into LA County when bad things happen in their jurisdictions. So maybe just kind of on those fronts, and maybe it all ties in lessons learned.
Sure. So I'll tackle the easy one first. Some of the best practices, I would say invest in relationships, invest in the community, build bridges, make time for your AFN partners and stakeholders outside of meetings. I've been through, and I'm sure all of you are in the same boat. We have like death by PowerPoint meetings. It's 2 hours long. And I mean, we've accomplished very little. And then over a 30-minute quick lunch or coffee, you've accomplished a lot more. So I'm sure we've all been to those. So try to make time outside of meetings for your AFN partners, get to know them, avoid transactional relationships, and make sure their voice is heard. So with our AFN committee, what we used to do is we would break them out into subcommittees for planning efforts, right? Whether it's planning for an exercise, whether it's planning to develop a plan, or a new initiative, whatever else it may be. And we would collect their input as a part of the planning process and then present it to the whole community, to the whole committee, okay? The committee had the opportunity to make recommendations. We would require the owner of that plan, the owner of that exercise, the owner of that initiative, regardless of which county department it was, to come back and share how those recommendations were integrated. I mean, that traffic of information flow needs to be going both ways, right? There is no point getting input if it's not being integrated. So we wanted to make sure that the committee understood their value, they were empowered. And I'm gonna echo Jeff's sentiment. One of the things that Jeff said that really resonates is do this before the emergency happens. This is really a best practice to build trust, making sure the community knows their voice is heard. Okay. In terms of reaching across jurisdictional boundaries, I think I said that earlier. LA County is a beast when it comes to jurisdictional boundaries. We have 88 cities. We have I think we have like 300 or 400 special districts. We have multiple critical infrastructure partners. We have federal lands, state lands. There are a lot of complexities of planning across jurisdictions, but that doesn't mean we can't do it, especially when it comes to rate limiting resources. ASL interpreters, very difficult to come by, especially those that can do interpretation of emergency management terminology, okay? There are times when I'm not a native English speaker, I speak Hindi at home. It's one of those where there are times when I have a difficult time translating from one to the other, right? So it's not always easy. So making sure you have competent ASL providers can be difficult, okay? But there are so few of them. Now imagine every city in the county, 88, LA County, our neighboring counties, all of us competing for the same resource. And we have one large earthquake that impacts all of us, okay? How is that critical resource going to be apportioned? Okay. And I mean, that's a planning that needs to happen early on. We've had success with paratransit. We have a local group that we've put together called Transmac. It involves local transit providers that also have paratransit vehicles, accessible vehicles. And this group becomes the coordinating body when one of them is impacted on how accessible vehicles are going to be provided. So make sure you have that as a part of the discussion early on. The most important is cost. Cost sharing across jurisdictional boundaries is a problem. So when you're discussing MOUs with your jurisdictional partners, keyword jurisdictional partners, not your AFN stakeholders, okay? Make sure that you're talking about cost and how cost sharing is going to work. Because I have seen MOUs fall apart real time because cost wasn't discussed early on. In the middle of the emergency is not the time to discuss that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got about 8 minutes left. I want to know really kind of two things. One, then Heather, I'm going to come to you on this, and then I'm going to ask everybody a separate question. So Heather, what's the role of the individual? Right? In other words, we're going to push on our government partners, and they need to stretch. But when it comes to personal evacuation planning, yeah, that key personal, right? What's the role of the individual?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the most important aspects of this is to have, I think, very frank and hard conversations, not just with ourselves as emergency managers, but, you know, with our communities and within our own families and friend groups as well. Because the truth is, you know, help is coming, but it's not coming immediately, you know, and in some cases and places, it might not even be coming for a week. So it's very, very important, you know, we never stop talking about this with our communities, you know, but really we have to support the community to understand what preparedness looks like. For me and my family, it's going to be much different than what it might look like for you and yours, you know, and really dive into topics like, you know, have you established a multi-person support team? You know, not just one buddy or caregiver that you rely on. Do you need practice maybe with this, you know, developing that skill of giving quick information on how to best help you to first responders? You know, have you planned multiple ways of getting information out to your support network? You know, that classic, you know, make a plan, pack a bag, be ready to go. It's just not going to cut it in today's disasters landscape. You know, we have to go much deeper with our communities and really dive into, you know, how we provide targeted and accessible preparedness information, you know, which allows our communities to make those actionable and relevant preparedness decisions for them. And that includes, you know, conversations around how you do this with limited resources. That has to be one of the key pieces of these conversations when we're, you know, helping and supporting our community members to own that individual preparedness piece.
100%. You know, I've got this thing we always say, come up with 5 people on your support network that you can count on or rely on, whether that's, you know, a spouse, a family member, a friend, a colleague, neighbor, whoever it is. Now, I want to know in our last 5 minutes, we'll just go around the horn. What do you see as the next big steps needed to make significant progress on this issue? Right? I mean, if you could wave the magic wand and have A, B, or C get implemented, what's the next big step? Jeff, what's the next big step?
So I would say 2 things to that. First, although I can't predict exactly what's going to happen, I think that due to the increase in emergencies that we are seeing and the severity of those disasters, I think you're going to see more mandatory requirements, perhaps even from the federal level, but certainly enacted by states over the next, decade or so. I think too that I'd like to see one would be more mandatory requirements on transit agencies, public transit agencies, to perform all the duties required in the evacuation sphere, because it varies a lot from place to place. And secondly, I think that there needs to be a greater degree of consistency among jurisdictions in terms of the degree to which they regulate and determine compliance for shelters, many of which, perhaps a majority of which, are private in nature.
All right, and sheltering is one of the panels we'll get into tomorrow, so that'll be a good deep dive there. Sanan, big steps. What's next?
So I would definitely say continue to empower communities. I think that's a never-ending task, right? You want to make sure that your stakeholders are valued. These relationships can deteriorate, can break down very quickly. So continue to empower your communities. For me, that really is paramount. I'm going to echo one of the things that Jeff said, though. There are some legislative needs that need to be pushed a bit further, especially around evacuation and sheltering. I think we have quite a bit of parameters that guide communication and emergency notifications. I would like to see something similar around evacuations and mass sheltering.
All right, Heather, what's next?
I am also going to echo Jeff in one of his previous comments about we've got to do better allocating funding to our centers for independent living so that they can prepare and really do that outreach themselves, and we were empowering them. I'd also like to really quickly highlight, we have several states that still do not have dedicated access and functional needs coordinators, helping to integrate their access and functional needs communities into their disaster planning and coordination and enterprise. So that's got to become a standard. And those are kind of my two big magic wand waves.
Fantastic. All right, look, it's been a great discussion. I could sit and talk with all of you for much, much longer. Thank you for lending us your expertise and your perspective. We got a ton of questions that came in. I'm going to send those to each of you, and we'll get responses, and then we're going to send out those responses to everybody that registered. So if you didn't get your question answered, it will be answered. And if you didn't submit a question, feel free to put one in. And with that, I'm going to officially close out this panel and say thank you very much, Heather. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Sanan. I invite you to go ahead and turn your cameras off and enjoy the rest of the symposium.
Thank you, Van.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. And now we have another panel coming up, and it is being moderated by the incomparable Anne-Marie McLaughlin. Hi, Anne-Marie.
You are too kind.
No, this is great. I cannot wait to see this. I'm going to back away, turn the mic over to you. Then I'm going to be a participant, just enjoying it with everyone else.
Here we have, okay, I see everyone here. This is fabulous. Thank you so much, Vance, and thank you to everyone on the planning team here. Let me just make sure I'm all set. So my name is Anne-Marie McLaughlin. I'm the Director of Emergency Management and Continuity at NYU. I use she, her pronouns. The physical description part is always challenging. I'm a middle-aged female with reddish blonde hair. How's that? So I'm really delighted to facilitate this panel. I have a background in public relations as well as emergency management. So this is near and dear to my heart. This is a special panel We've got folks from different disciplines. We've got practitioners. We're very excited to have somebody with academic research to bring to bear, and also someone from the technology realm. As we know, technology is so important when we think about alert and warning. We know that not everyone in the community receives or processes information in the same way, but we also know that alerting is critical to save lives. So this is a really important topic. I'm so grateful to have the panel that we have with us. I'm going to provide a little bio, and then we will follow the same format as Vance did before us. Each person will have about 5 minutes to speak to the topic, and then we'll go into questions. Again, no PowerPoint slides, keeping this to a fireside chat, as Vance likes to say. So we have David Meyer. He's the Program Manager, State of California Alert and Warning Program from the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. He's got over 25 years of state service, and he currently serves as Program Manager for the State of California's Alert and Warning Program. It is a daunting task. He is responsible as the lead for providing guidance and support to California.
Sorry, can you read a little bit slower for the interpreters, please?
Sorry. It's a combination of Boston and New York. I'm sorry. So as the lead, he is responsible for providing guidance and support to California's 138 alerting authorities. Prior to his current role, he served as the communications chief for the state for 8 years. We're very excited to have him with us. Noah Ryder is the Chief Customer Officer from Rave Mobile Safety, a Motorola Solutions company. He and his team are responsible for empowering Rave's customers to impact emergency response, critical communications, and community safety through technology. He has previously served in various public sector and public safety roles, including Assistant City Manager for the City of Sandy Springs, Georgia, EMS Director for Grady Health System in Atlanta, and as the Director of EMS Security and Emergency Preparedness for Lenox Hill Hospital here in New York City. He holds degrees from Rice University and the University of Houston and resides in Fort Collins, Colorado. We also are delighted to have with us Dr. Jeanette Sutton. She specializes in disaster and risk with a primary focus on online informal communication and public alerts and warnings disseminated via short messaging channels. Much of her research investigates the evolving role of communication and communications technology, including social media and mobile devices, for disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. She is employed at the University of Albany, SUNY, as an associate professor in the Department of Emergency Management and Homeland Security. She is also the director of the Emergency and Risk Communication Message Testing Lab. And in her spare time, I love this part, she critiques wireless emergency alerts on Twitter. You can find her. Her handle is at Warning Rater, WARNINGRATER. It's fabulous. And she also hosts a webpage called The Warn Room, as in warning, thewarnroom.com altogether. She's held numerous grants. She's a very productive, prolific academic. She's got a lot of publications in risk analysis, Journal of Homeland Security, et cetera. You can find the details on the website. Her PhD in sociology is from the University of Colorado in Boulder, and she completed her postdoc training at the Natural Hazards Center. And we also have with us Jorge Rodriguez. He has been in emergency management for over 8 years. He is the Community Alert and Warning Coordinator for the County of Sonoma Department of Emergency Management. He has been with Sonoma County since June of 2020. He was in the county as an EMMA resource during the 2019 Kincaid fire. His experience includes bilingual public information work. He's produced live stream press briefings during COVID-19 and radiological emergency preparedness and planning messaging. He's a CEM And in his formal role as a community alert and warning coordinator, Jorge was responsible for managing the SOCO alert mass notification system and the auto-generated message system. He also had a hand in general planning and operations. He is now the supervising emergency services coordinator overseeing the emergency coordination division. We are so happy to have this distinguished panel with us today. And as mentioned, we're going to go ahead and each person's going to have about 5 minutes to share their experience and their ideas about this topic, inclusive alert and warning. And then we will ask some questions. As before, I can anticipate this topic will also generate a lot of questions, as we saw with the last topic. We will follow the same protocol. They'll be collecting the questions in the Q&A section. So if you have a question, please include it in the Q&A and we will collect it and we will get back to you. So with that, we will go to David Meyer. David, do you want to share your ideas on this topic?
Yeah, thank you, Anne-Marie. As mentioned, my name is David Meyer. I am the program manager of the Alert and Warning Program for the state of California. I've been the Alert and Warning in the Alert and Warning Program now for about 5 years and about 2 years now as a manager. And I've seen just about everything that can happen with alerting with all the disasters that California has faced. Some of my thunder, I think, was stolen by the keynote and some of the other addresses because they are also from Cal OES. And so as they spoke about disasters and the need to be prepared for those disasters, they definitely covered what I would have covered as far as the incidents that we've been involved with. I can tell you that I have a great staff that supports my team. It's what we do is not possible as an individual, but with a staff. And my staff is made up of individuals with very interesting backgrounds. I have one that was a survivor of the Sonoma fires in 2017. She did lose her home in that fire, but she understands the importance of alert and warning. And she also was a CAD dispatcher for Marin County before that. I also have a new individual that actually was involved in setting up shelters and transporting individuals from evacuation sites during the same fires. So he has that first responder mentality to alert and warning as well. So also, just to share a little story about kind of where I come from and what I've seen with the whole inclusive nature of alert and warning. And that is that I have a nephew that he is a nonverbal developmentally delayed young adult. But I've seen him firsthand, the confusion and the chaos that emergencies can play in his life. Recently, we had an issue where he had to deal with some engagements with law enforcement. And then later on with fire due to an incident that happened at home with dad becoming ill. And the paramedic showed up at the door and knocked on the door. He answered the door, but then quickly slammed the door and ran away from the door because he was not sure what was happening. It wasn't until one of the paramedics tried to talk to him through the door, but then also started using American Sign Language to communicate with him, that he really came to a better place. He was a little bit more comfortable trying to have some conversation with the individual. And at the end of the event, just to say, he was actually holding the door open to help them get dad into the ambulance so that he could then be taken to the hospital. And I say all of that because even the simplest interaction during an emergency can present very real challenges. It's not enough to say that when the emergency is occurring that we need to think about how this may affect vulnerable populations, but we've got to take a ground up approach to inclusive alerting. And that begins with community planning, exercises, and outreach with the access and functional needs communities. So that we can better understand how they're affected by the emergencies and by those alerts. If they're forced to take a protective action, we need to give them enough time and resources to be able to make that evacuation or shelter in place more successful and less dangerous. And that we've identified obstacles that could create additional stress and possibly add confusion to an already very complex situation. As mentioned above a little bit before from the keynote and from other, I think Vance has talked about it as well, the state's been involved in creating the state alert and warning guidelines. The original guidelines were published in 2019, and it was a very well-written document that provides guidance on alert and warning. It provides roles, it provides experience on message creation, and kind of how and when alerting would be appropriate, as well as all the other toolkits that might be needed in order to be successful in the approach. Now, that being said, the first set of guidelines was done in 2019, and as a result of Assembly Bill 580, we actually took another look at the guidelines and we added additional folks to our planning team. We have an alert and warning specialist committee that's set up under our SIMS committees. And in that committee, we have several members of the access and functional needs community that provided input on what the new guidelines look like. And we took a look at the guidelines, not as a single chapter within the guidelines, but actually as an entire rewrite of the effort within the guidelines, so that everywhere in the guidelines, it would preach inclusivity. And I think we've done a great job with that. It's actually going through its final review process right now. And as that's made available, we would certainly encourage everybody to take a look at it. It was very well received, and it has some planning and other guidelines in the back for your alert warning programs, as well as templates. It utilizes some templates from some of the Dr. Maletti practices for message creation. And I'm thrilled to death to have Jeanette Sutton on to speak about what she's doing now with message creation and the whole science behind that. So, you know, the final piece of that is that my team is very involved in technology. We are looking at all types of technology that we hope will lessen the burden on vulnerable populations during disasters, making alerts and warnings available in multiple languages, potentially ASL, audio playback, and it will greatly increase the reach of alerts and warnings in the areas that have been excluded in years past. It's our hope that we can engage with multiple different partners to bring alerting to all persons so that they can be included in all of our alerting efforts now and into the future. And again, I'll yield back and look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Anne-Marie, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Noah. Dr. Sutton, would you like to go next? Since you were mentioned, and I'm reading the Q&A here. Folks are interested in resources. We will be providing resources along with the answers to questions. So as folks are noting reports and links, Dr. Sutton previously provided some links, so those will be sent out afterwards. Dr. Sutton, please.
Sure. Thank you. And it's really a pleasure to be here and to participate in this conversation. And thank you, David, for kicking that off and talking about the amazing resources that are available in California and the leadership that you're providing across the United States by developing those different guidance documents and such. So my background is as an academic. I've been studying alerts and warnings for about 20 years now. Dr. Dennis Maletti was my advisor, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to continue the work that we started together back in the early 2000s. So my pathway as a student and then as an academic was to study how risk was communicated over different kinds of channels, and I focused on short messaging channels, primarily initially through Twitter, starting in like 2006 as it was first starting, and really seeing how it could be this amazing channel for collective intelligence and communication between people, as well as from public officials to individuals. and by the what we call technological affordances that come with these new channels, like a social media channel, which allows not only information to come to you, but to also to communicate back. So there's a dialogue between individuals and officials. And then the incorporation of things beyond just text, the audio, the video, the visuals, all of those things can increase the ability for people to have access to really key information that's needed in what we call an imminent threat situation, which is something is coming, it's going to happen very, very soon, and we need information quickly. And those social media channels also made it possible for members of the public to exchange information about things like, how do I find this evacuation information that's so important that was just discussed in the last panel, which, providing that information, obviously from a trusted resource would be the best option, but in the absence of that, people would exchange that information through their trusted networks online. So we started to study those things as Twitter was rolling out, and we were seeing it also on Facebook, and Twitter is not as great a resource as it used to be, and when it was initially launched. I don't know where emergency managers and risk communicators are going to turn to next as a channel that they can rely on to communicate in real time, that provides that accessible information and exchange of information. But the initial days, we really saw it as a wonderful place that could provide this collective activity of communicating. And then as the wireless emergency alert system started to roll out in the early 2012, that was when I got to start working again with Dr. Maletti, who has unfortunately passed. He died from COVID 2 years ago. So his memory, we continue to the research agenda that he began, we continue that, and a lot of it is on his shoulders, which we're very thankful for. But the work in wireless emergency alerts has really expanded because of a lot of attention that it's gotten, especially if we think back to some really key alerts that have captured the imagination of the entire United States. I think to the intercontinental ballistic missile alert that was issued to the state of Hawaii around Christmas time a few years ago, and how that really, I think, made people recognize the power of alerting systems and the system itself, as well as the messages that go out over them, and how important it is to think about how we communicate using these channels that have such a broad reach in such an instantaneous fashion. And that attention that was brought from that false alarm brought greater attention from Congress to improve wireless emergency alerts nationwide. And so from that, as David alluded to, the science of alerting, the science of messaging, the integrated public alert and warning system from FEMA has funded a project that we've been working on at the University at Albany to design what we call the message design dashboard, which will help message originators to construct messages in real time by giving them the contents that they need to develop a message following the workflow that has been identified through research that shows this is the structure of a message from beginning to end that is the best case, and helping to provide those contents about the hazard and the hazard impacts and the guidance that's necessary for people to make a decision about what they're going to do in response to those hazards. It's based in research. We are thrilled to be able to provide this kind of technology to all alerting originators. And when I think about access and functional needs related to this, as Vance and I were talking about it in preparation for this webinar, I was thinking about how so much of the traditional research within the disaster space around alerts and warnings has focused not on people with access and functional needs in terms of visual and auditory needs, but vulnerable populations very broadly. And in thinking about that, we recognize that some of the most important things that we need to do when we're communicating imminent threat messages is to have a very complete message that is internally consistent among its parts, that's very clear and does not include jargon or technological terms. It's accurate, obviously. And then, but as Vance and I were talking, I was thinking imminent threat often means that those messages are going out very close to the time of an event occurring, which means that not only do we need to rethink, we as wireless emergency alerts and our other communication, about how to meet the needs of this broadly vulnerable population, but also think about how do we make it possible for them to take actions so that they have the time to take the actions, in addition to understanding that message and having the self-efficacy to act. So feeling that they can act because they have the time as well as the resources, in addition to the knowledge and the ability to understand what we're asking people to do. So one of the things that I did in my free time, as Anne-Marie alluded to, was to create this website called The Warn Room, and it's TheWarnRoom.com, I think. I'll put it in the chat, or you'll get it as a resource. And my intention was to take scientific research on alerts and warnings and translate it for the average practitioner, so that you can take all of the stuff we've been learning for the last 50 years and apply it directly to the messages that you are writing. So we take existing messages that are available through pbs.org, through the pbs.warn site online, and I see bad messages on a daily basis. My intention is to take those and edit them to show you how some tweaks to the language and to the formatting of the information can drastically improve how they are received and understood by just making some changes to the language. And so that is my contribution back to the broader community, not the academic community, but the broader community, by communicating science in easier to digest ways. So I will stop there, and I'm excited to have a conversation with the rest of my colleagues who are on this call.
Definitely, definitely. Very excited. So we're hearing about, the ideal message. There's the message itself, and then there's the way it gets to the people. And so this brings us to Noah from Rave. Noah, what can you share?
Hopefully I can contribute something on top of what I know the other panelists will. You've assembled quite the panel here, but I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in what's a really important discussion. So as Anne-Marie mentioned earlier, my name's Noah Reiter. I'm currently the Chief Customer Officer for Rave Mobile Safety, which is now a division of Motorola Solutions. For the better part of the past 17 years, Rave has partnered with organizations that are responsible for the safety of their communities. Among other solutions, we offer an industry-leading communication platform called Rave Alert to thousands of state and local governments, institutes of higher education, and corporations throughout North America. While I'm obviously partial towards our own technology and the way we do things at Rave, I'll do my best today to sort of serve the role as a representative of your emergency notification technology provider, and hopefully represent how at least I believe they should be partnering with you, whether it's us or another one in the space. So your ENS provider shouldn't simply be a development and services shop. They should be an active partner to you with deep subject matter expertise. They should also have a keen interest in your operational needs. Your primary point of contact, likely a member of what's called a customer success team, should serve as your liaison and act as your advocate across the broader organization, doing things like sharing your feedback, connecting you to other parts of the organization. As one example, maybe to our product management team. This customer advocacy approach has allowed us to become a trusted extension of our customers' organizations. And by doing so through this customer-centric philosophy, it creates several opportunities for us as your ENS provider to serve your needs better, more holistically, and ultimately deliver an outstanding customer experience. When I think of what customer experience means,
it means not only the technology and how user-friendly it is and the feature set and its capabilities, but it's also how the organization engages with you. So how we as a company engage with you and vice versa. In fact, personally, one of the most rewarding aspects of being an advocate, a trusted advocate for our customers, is being able to connect our customers with one another and providing forums to share and develop best practices. As I alluded to earlier, by participating in these discussions, that deepens our understanding of the current challenges that you all are facing, which also allows us to further strengthen our solutions capabilities, which then can streamline your workflows, broaden your reach, and better protect your community, which is ultimately all of our goal here, right? In addition to the motivation that our customers provide me with on a daily basis, as Anne-Marie mentioned when she shared my bio with you, my pre-rave professional life was spent in EMS administration, emergency management, and city management. There were a couple of notable past experiences that I had that continue to drive my curiosity around how to better engage the community, communicate with the public in a highly inclusive manner. So during the blackout back in 2003, I was the EMS director and on the emergency preparedness team for Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City. Our EMS crews and all others across the 5 boroughs and beyond responded for 26 hours to not only typical calls for service, but also those from individuals impacted by the loss of power. People reliant upon the use of assistive devices, maybe home ventilators, and others. Many of these people required rescue. We, and I assume no one else in the city, had any way of anticipating which residents had pre-existing health conditions or other needs so that we could have been even a bit more proactive. So we basically resorted to answering 911 calls, and we surely did. As an anecdote, one of our crews climbed and descended 144 stories in the course of their shift. Similarly, in 2011, there was a severe winter weather emergency that struck the greater Atlanta area. At the time, I was an assistant city manager for Sandy Springs. I had a number of public safety programs in my portfolio. And again, I witnessed many of the same issues over this 4-day period. While residents in this instance weren't without power, transportation was significantly disrupted. So individuals who required things like regular dialysis, home deliveries of oxygen, missed their appointments, and critical deliveries of medical equipment and other therapies. And this led to unnecessary medical complications. Once again, EMS and fire were left chasing 911 calls, and the healthcare system left picking up the pieces. While some amount of this obviously will always be inevitable, and depending on the size and scope of the incident, systems will obviously be overwhelmed. But I'm still convinced today that we can collaborate to develop better strategies for preparing for these types of scenarios and the needs of the whole community. So I'll stop there, but once again, I really also look forward to today's discussion and also to learning from the other panelists and all of you, and I'll do my best to share some of my perspectives.
No, thank you, Noah. And, I've worked with Rave over the years, and, it's true, bringing practitioners together is super helpful, right? And becoming more aware of each other's needs and best practices. And so we're really happy to have another practitioner on the panel, Jorge Rodriguez. Jorge, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you. Greetings to wherever you may be. I am Jorge Rodriguez, the Supervising Emergency Services Coordinator here for the County of Sonoma, California, Department of Emergency Management. To describe myself, I'm a Mexican-American male with black hair and glasses, and I'm wearing my black polo shirt. To get started, Sonoma County is no stranger to disasters and large-scale emergencies. But to give everyone some perspective, the Department of Emergency Management has only been a part of the County of Sonoma organization for 4 years. It's been around since 2019. But in that time frame, the county has proclaimed 13 local emergencies. So to the Cal OES Chief Deputy's point earlier, we too are still in the recovery for some of these emergencies. But we'll go back a bit farther to the point where this really begins, 2017. And in 2017, the county experienced a series of large and devastating wildfires where, within a matter of hours, we had 36,000 acres consumed by the fire, thousands of structures, primarily homes, burned to the ground. And we also had the unfortunate loss of life that was in the number of dozens. But to the subject here for alert and warning, at that time for that incident, alert and warning was deemed a failure in the days, weeks, and months that came after the fire. Alerts were sent out to a small number of residents, with some of those warning messages sent to areas already burned to the ground and no longer there, folks already evacuated. But now, as a practitioner, we've seen a lot of changes here within alert and warning in Sonoma County, but it's been for the better. And now we are at the forefront because of that 2017 experience, and again, the experiences in 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021. We've again a lot of local emergencies since we've been here. Fortunately, no major incidences in 2022. We did have some impacts earlier this year during the January storms, and so far the 2023 this year's fire season is still a little early for us. So we hope we don't have the need for major alert and warning, but we certainly are ready. To give you some background for the department, we have our own alert and warning division. As Anne-Marie mentioned, I was previously the alert and warning coordinator. The division is managed by a full-time program manager, supported by that coordinator. And this is something that at the time when this was created, this division specific to alert and warning and having staff specific to alert and warning wasn't necessarily something that was heard of for county emergency management. So now, as part of our program, we integrate customer data from local utilities. We get our contact data lists from power water companies. We purchase lists from telecommunication vendors to augment and further the outreach we have in our alerts. So it's much farther and much more larger than what we would get by just folks registering and doing the opt-in type of mass notification. But we make it our priority now here in Sonoma County, and this is one of the things that we continue to do, is to send out alerts in various ways. With our largest commitment, because of 2017 and those disasters that followed, to send out warnings in both English and in Spanish at the same time, not just one after the other, but sending them both at the same time. And that's really what's now an expectation of our community, and we work to make that happen whenever we have that need. So, like was mentioned in the last panel, what we did here to support our residents in the deaf and hard of hearing community, we obtained a grant to purchase NOAA weather radios with adapters that vibrate and have a light strobe flasher to get the residents' attention, letting them know that the radio is activated. It doesn't change necessarily the way of how we send out the alerts, but it helps us reach more residents by using that technology and the infrastructure that's out there to leverage that and be able to offer a more robust alert and warning program. One of our cities obtained a separate grant to purchase several thousand of these radios for the residents as well. So these radios are now also out in the community and of course, ready to get the alert if we were to send one. And for some perspective on Sonoma County, we are a large agricultural area. Sonoma County wine is being a huge industry here. And we have workers and harvesters who pick and harvest, often coming from out of the area or even out of the country to work. They work in remote areas and sometimes live in employer-sponsored housing that's also in the remote area where cell phone signal is spotty at best, or they may not be non-existent at all. So using that same NOAA weather radio system and using that technology, we started a program with our Agricultural Commissioner's Office to not only supply a radio, but we also came up with a poster that has information on what to do if this radio activates, if it plays the emergency alert tones, what those workers should do who to contact, the evacuation zone that's specific to that area, the radio stations that they should tune to is on that poster, and it's listed right there, clearly visible, so that there's an understanding of what to do next. And as we get further to the panel discussion here, just want to quickly say that there's no one system, and we're fortunate to have a Rave here as part of the panel, but there's no one system that works for everything and for everyone. It doesn't work for us as local government, the alert originators, those who push the button, and certainly for residents to reach everyone at that 100%. So what we do is we use what we have available, the resources and systems that we have available to push that alert out and provide as much warning as possible early on in an incident. And we do that to get our best and most reach out in the community. And there was a question in the last panel on what the responsibility of residents is, and I'll touch on that here. It's our responsibility as residents of our own community is to know those alerting systems that are available to you and what your local jurisdiction offers and carries and has available, and have access to 2 or 3 of them. Register if you need to. We have the technology for NOAA weather radios. If your local jurisdiction is using that program, getting a radio that's programmed to your locality. Have a support plan for yourself. Asking yourself and answering the questions. What do I have to help me? Who do I have to help me? Is it my neighbor or things? What am I going to do? Where or when will I go if I receive an alert? And so answering those questions now, so when the time comes, you're smelling smoke, you're seeing the floodwaters rising, you're not asking yourself at that point, I got this alert, something is happening, obviously, now what? Now what do I do? Have that plan in place already. And real quickly, para mis participantes de habla hispana, and I'll say this in Spanish, es importante saber los sistemas de alertas y advertencias de tu comunidad. Averigua cómo va a recibir las alertas y lo que va a hacer cuando las reciba. Tome tiempo ahora, antes de la emergencia, porque es importante estar listo y tener un plan. Gracias and thank you. I'll stop there, Anne-Marie, and thank you for the privilege of your time.
Thank you, Jorge. And I'm anticipating the question of what particular weather radio you all provided. So if we can include that in the package that we send out to folks afterwards, I think that would probably be good information for folks to have. So now we're going to move in. Thank you, everybody, for your initial comments. We're going to move into some questions. And just going back to David, you're involved in revising and improving California's alert and warning guidelines. Could you help us understand how you were able to, really help the guidelines prioritize and incorporate the unique requirements of people with access and functional needs? We think about limited mobility, sensory impairments, cognitive disabilities. How did you go about that, and what do the guidelines provide now?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Emery. First of all, I think one of the things that we've done that's really strengthened our efforts in the state is, and we've kind of added, we've already talked about it a little bit, but it was the adding of the Access and Functional Needs Office to our agency. Vance Taylor and his team have been absolutely integral in our efforts of better understanding what's needed during disasters and how those alerts are going to be formulated, timing that would be involved in sending those alerts, and all of the different variables that come about. And really what we've done to prioritize our efforts is that, again, the guidelines, we set up the Alert and Warning Specialist Committee. And in that committee, we added individuals that, in fact, Jeff is one of your previous panel members, is a member of that committee. And so he was able to give us a perspective from folks that are sight deprived and what they would need to see in an alert, and what that guidance would need to be to the originators of those alerts as they're creating them. And we've seen that also through whole community planning efforts, Our agency is, as a result of AB 580, have definitely dove into the importance of those, not only the plans for the emergency itself, but what the alert plan looks like. And my staff actually reviews, as well as Vance's staff, reviews those alert plans to make sure that we are including all of the populations that we need to be. Everything from, the older generation who the flip phone is their friend, and they don't want to do the smartphone. So how do you reach those individuals? Jorge's mentioned radios, and we in our guidelines, we mention a lot of different methods of reaching those individuals, everything from EAS, which is the emergency alert system, through the television, partnering with other providers that can do things like ASL and other types of interpretations of the message, so that we are reaching all of those folks as well. And as a priority within our group, we're really focused on trying to reach out to all of the different vendors and partners and stakeholders to try to figure out the best way that we can move this forward. How can we as the state help them? How can we help them with grants? How can we help them with resources? What can we provide to those individuals so that they can move forward in making alerting a lot more inclusive for the state?
Thank you. Thank you. Super helpful. And I see there's a question here, and I know we're not answering all of them. This is actually a question that I was going to ask Dr. Sutton anyway. When you were talking earlier about the correct message, message quality can really vary, and we've all seen messages, and maybe even in our own communities, that are hard to understand. The quality is not consistent. What does a well-written message look like in comparison to not a great alert?
So I actually pulled up some of the examples that I've put up on thewarnroom.com because I have in there something I call the warning gallery, which is kind of a list of messages that don't hit the mark. And then I also have another page called the editor's desk, which takes messages and edits them and shows you how they can be improved. A message that is well written will include 5 contents. It will include the source of the message so people know who it's coming from. That increases people's trust, and it increases their belief in the message, that it's not some spam thing showing up on their phone, especially if it's coming through a wireless emergency alert. If you've opted into a system and a message is supposed to come from that organization, the source is maybe intuited by the message receiver, but we get so many notifications on our phones, we may not know who it's from if it doesn't actually say who that source is. The second thing a message should include is the name of the hazard itself, and what that hazard could potentially do to people. I frequently will see a message that doesn't include the name of the hazard. It will just tell people to evacuate, or it will tell people to shelter in place without telling them why. And that is something that, David, we could probably have conversations about the language around those things, about how can we improve people's understanding of why they're being asked to take those actions, and how understanding that will lead them to have greater personalization of the threat, so that the personalization itself increases people's perception that the risk applies to them, and then they can make the decision to take an action. When you tell somebody to evacuate or shelter in place, and it's basically an order or a command, you're taking away some of their self-efficacy or their self-motivation, and people simply do not just do what they're told to do anyways. The third thing a message needs to include is the location, which is very hard to describe when you're doing it in a short amount of characters on a short message. We do not yet know how effective adding a map would be to messaging, but it is something that we've considered and thought, how could we improve that? Perhaps if it was utilizing some sort of an app that places the individual at the location of the threat so they can see it's very personalized information. That may help. Also, we need to know the timing of the event itself or when they need to take action by, so that we understand if we have the time to actually do what's being told or recommended, or if we need to consider a different action that may not even be recommended as we're making sense of what is happening around us with the environmental cues and the social cues that are present. And then perhaps the most important thing, which I've left for last, is the guidance. People need to know how to take what actions they should take and how to take those actions effectively. And when you couple that with what the hazard impacts are, people can make sense of, I'm being asked to take this action because this could be the impact from this threat. And when putting all that information together, it helps people to make sense of the conditions holistically and how they can protect themselves. So I thought I would share with you just a few examples of messages that lack some of those things. When a message is complete, it includes all 5 of those things. And you can see by a couple of these messages that I'll just read to you that they're not complete. And when they're not complete, it reduces our ability to understand the hazard, where it's located, what we need to do to protect ourselves. It decreases our belief in what may be happening, especially if the source information is not included. It decreases our ability to personalize what's happening, especially if we don't know that we are in the location of that threat or don't understand that the risk can affect us directly. And so those are things that we really want to increase, because that will motivate people to take action. So here's an example of a message that was sent recently. It says, sheriff request all residents to shelter in place due to incident on town line. So that was a wireless emergency alert that was issued. And if we were to rewrite that, we notice, so it said, sheriff request all residents to shelter in place. So we can assume that that message is from the sheriff's office. So that would be the first thing I would change, is to say the county sheriff is issuing this message. And then I would tell them why they're being asked to shelter in place. I would say that it's some sort of a law enforcement activity. And this law enforcement activity could lead to these kinds of things. That is the reason that we want people to take this action of sheltering in place. If I was located in town line, I would understand where that is, but I might provide additional information about where that is, the timing at which the sheltering in place should occur, and for how long. And if they don't know for how long, adding additional information about where they can go to get more information would be incredibly valuable. A phone number, a link to a website, a link to a social media webpage where there can be some conversation about what's happening so that people can confirm information. Because when we receive a warning, our first natural instinct is to confirm it with other people, to confirm that the information is correct and that the hazard is going to actually occur. And so by providing a place for people to go to talk to each other, we may be increasing people's feeling of efficacy and the sense that if I take the action that's recommended, I know other people are doing it too because they trust that information. And that just increases people's motivation to act. So by taking that very short message as an example, we can really improve it by following the guidelines of the source of the message, the hazard and what it can do, where it's located and the timing that hazard is occurring, and then telling people how to respond so that they can take action to protect themselves.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much. I feel, really grateful to be on this panel and to be listening to this. And I actually, the next question for Noah is, what is the role of technology provider in alert and warning? As I'm seeing the Q&A, like a lot of people are going to, when you mentioned, Dr. Sutton, maps, or, folks are asking about ArcGIS and about AI, chat GPT, all of this stuff, it's technology is tied to messaging, right, in emergency management. So Noah, the question is, what's the role of the technology provider? But if anything that Dr. Sutton mentioned, if you want to respond, please do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the guidance based on, many years, if not decades of research is extremely sound. And we're lucky to have you as a panelist. Some of the questions that are coming in around, as Anne-Marie mentioned, chat GPT and artificial intelligence and lots of new technologies that are emerging. We obviously are constantly exploring opportunities to strengthen our own platforms through these new and emerging technologies, but doing so in a responsible manner. It's, chat GPT, based on my limited interaction with it, is incredibly powerful. Would you trust it to author a message for you? Yeah, I see Dr. Sutton shaking her head no. But there's potentially an application for it. Remains to be seen. I think in line with, one of the other, questions around language translation and auto translators, they're good. We all know they're not perfect. Nothing replaces the human in, crafting an effective message. Moving on to, a related question, concern, or acknowledgement that's been posted in the Q&A is around character limitations, right? So we'd love for messages to provide all of the detail, all of the potential impacts, all of the instructions possible, but most providers require that you do it within 160 characters, or, a wireless emergency alert, 90 characters. So you have character constraints, which makes it even more challenging to construct the perfect message. Or what's the highest star rating on your website? I was glancing. Is it 4 or 5 stars, Dr. Sutton? Because I've recognized you don't necessarily want to be featured on this website, but there are a few good examples, which is great. But yeah, there's a real character limitation, and the reason that our company enforces the character limitation is for speed. I think many of the panelists discussed earlier the need in many of these instances to get the message out quickly. Speed is critical. Time is of the essence. Usually, unless we're talking about a hurricane or something like that, we don't have a lot of notice for these incidents, right? So if you're doubling the number of SMS text messages you're sending out because you allow through your interface a user to send a 300 character message, which the SMS aggregator is going to break up into 2 messages, you're now doubling the time that it takes to communicate with your community. So there's definitely a balance here between getting the information right, doing it in a concise manner, and doing it in a manner that the receiver can effectively interpret, whether it's because it's translated, whether because maybe there's a graphic or a map or a certain call to action. And then I see some comments or questions about both Rave and some of our competitors about how we allow additional characters, let's call them, or instructions through a link that we embed in an alert. So we still maintain the 160 character limit so that we can get all of the messages out as quickly as possible. But if you need to drive your recipients to more detailed instructions or maybe visuals or graphics, you can do so by embedding a link. So we offer that, and I know many of the other providers do as well. So hopefully that's helpful.
It's super helpful. As a practitioner myself, and I'm looking at David and Jorge, practitioners, we're in this position of we want to reach our communities. And, so Jorge, this will be for you. We're thinking about all these different technologies and again, crafting the message. What gaps have you found in alert and warning? Cell phones, carrier system limitations. It seems like there are lots of different tools and the community is diverse. What are your thoughts?
Sure, no, thank you. And to Noah's point, the infrastructure, the systems that we have access through RAVE or through some other platforms, goes through these federal alerting systems, and those systems have limitations of their own. Not to mention that once we send out an alert and it goes through those federal systems, then it branches out into the cell phone service, and each cell phone service, your AT&T, T-Mobile, et cetera, have different ways that they send out the wireless emergency alerts. Those that get pushed to the cell phones. And take it a little bit further from there, we have found that each phone version, your iPhone 6 versus the iPhone 7 versus the iPhone 12 to your Androids and Google phones, they each have different ways that they display the message. Those different operating systems between your Apple and your Androids. Not to mention that they also rely on cell phone towers. So if the power is out and it's out for extended periods of time, and they don't have the redundant power capabilities, it wouldn't go through that tower, and you who may be sitting right there next to the tower or in close proximity to it, you wouldn't receive that alert. So this is why we use and are looking at using and coming up with different ways to alert the community. I mentioned the NOAA weather radio, and in the comments there's questions on which one is the one to use, and to kind of quickly answer the question. The important piece of a NOAA weather radio is that it have the public alert logo on the box, and this with the public alert logo, it'll sit. Once it's done to your local settings, you can plug it in, set it, forget it. And if your National Weather Service office and if your local jurisdiction has the access to it, that will only go off if you receive or if there's an alert for that area. So it must have the public alert logo. So be sure to look for those. But we, again, use NOAA weather radios. We use SoCo Alert, which is our mass notification system, to get that information out in different ways. And we can use it to send out text messages, we use it voice messages, and again, voice messages in both English and Spanish. You can do text messages, or they have an app. We can push it out to our emergency website. So using the technologies that are out there to really leverage and get that alert message out. We're seeing social media, changing in different ways, but we use that as an amplifier to the alert. We use a 2 a.m. or 2 in the morning standard here, that if it's not going to wake somebody up at 2 in the morning because there's an incident, what is something that will work? Back to the weather radios, and there's those attachments that can help folks that who may also have a hard time waking up. There's some of us who might have a train passing by and we wouldn't know it when we're in deep sleep. So those things like that we have made available, and we use the systems that are out there, but also partnering with private industry and NOAA and WAVE or RAVE through technologies to kind of get together and forming these connections, being able to let them know what our needs are, and create the relationship that way as well. And I'll put a plug in there for local alerting originators or emergency managers who are on the call. Currently right now the FCC is looking at doing some proposed rulemaking that affects the wireless emergency alerts and the ways that we get those out there. Again, the work that Dr. Sutton does with the message design dashboard and the different translation and ways and things. So that's out there. I believe that it'll be closing here fairly shortly. But again, for local emergency managers to reach out and look for that, to provide their comments as well and be a part of that rulemaking process with our federal partners.
No, thank you. Super helpful. The next question is for David. What are the potential impacts on vulnerable access and functional needs communities when alert systems fail to send out timely and accurate notifications during emergencies? I think we're aware, but what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, we know that the way alerts work, and really the way that similar to communications, which was my background before I came into alerting, is it's never talked about unless it goes bad. So when it goes bad, you have to look at why it went bad. Did it go bad because the message that was created was not the right message for what you intended to do? Or did it go bad because infrastructure failed and we didn't have a way of reaching those individuals? So I think that the impacts, and I know in a lot of conversation with Vance and with other stakeholders that I've talked to regarding AFN, it has to do really a lot with timing. I mean, when does that alert get out? If you know you're going to have to remove a population that could be transient, they don't have vehicles, they don't have what they need to get out, or they're in older, like a convalescent hospital or a memory care facility, you've got to give them the time to be able to do what you're asking them to do. It's not as simple as saying evacuate now, the fire is at your back door. It's got to be, you know, the timing is critical to how you play into that. And really the only way you learn that timing is by that outreach, reaching out to those groups, finding out what it is they need in order to be able to do these things. I know that with Jeff on the line, I've talked with some other individuals that are site deprived, and they've got family members and others that are involved in helping them to do things like evacuate or maybe prepare for something that is coming their direction. And again, without the appropriate timing involved in those things, it's really tough for you to be able to get it out there and know that it's doing what you need it to do. I really think that you know, the state has done a good job with its guidance and identifying some of those things, but there's still gaps. There's still areas that we know that we can do better. And I think the new evacuation guidance that's coming out is going to do a lot of that. And I think also some of the groups that are put together, like we have a group that we work with FEMA on, we partnered with them called When Minutes Matter. And again, When Minutes Matter is a group of emergency managers and other professionals within the public safety realm that have an interest in alert and warning, but this is an opportunity to share in that forum what works, what doesn't, and how we can be better. And I think those are the things that we definitely need to rely on going forward in order to make our programs more successful.
Thank you. Super helpful. I'm keeping an eye on the time. I want to keep going until somebody tells us we're done, because this is fascinating. Dr. Sutton, you know, we're talking about how do we know we're successful, right? And of course, we can look and see if, you know, if people actually are able to evacuate. One of the questions that I had for Dr. Sutton, alert and warning channels tend to focus on the whole community at the expense of those who are most vulnerable. What do we know about how messages reach those who are at greatest risk, and how can we increase the reach?
Yes, this is a really tough question. It's a step beyond the work that I do in message design, because we're talking about stepping away from the keyboard and going into the community to talk to people about how did they get that message, and was it believable and understandable, and how were they able to take action? And it means going and doing surveys and talking to people about their experiences of a threatening event and the decisions that they made in maybe on their own or in collaboration with others to take an action, and whatever that action is on the other end. And so we know that there's a tremendous number of technologies that have emerged that make it possible to reach people, all the different channels that David and Noah and Jorge have talked about, that have different kinds of affordances that allow people to see things, hear things, feel things. And those technologies are wonderful. And yet the most vulnerable people that, as I was talking earlier today with Carol Park, who is the emergency manager for Los Angeles City and County, and she asked me, what about the very most vulnerable people? And the work that I've done has really focused on this very broad, the broad public, because that is a wireless emergency alert goes out to the broad general public. But the very most vulnerable populations, your small pockets of people who are non-English speaking, your smaller pockets of people who are homebound or within an institution or dependent on other providers, those people, the way that those people are reached are most frequently through social networks. And it's through those relationships, through the direct one-to-one communication, through other kinds of, maybe through technologies, but frequently it's when somebody picks up the phone and calls or knocks on the door and says directly to that person, we need to go, or we need to do this. And that is a much, as challenging as technology is, the challenge of communicating directly to an individual one-on-one to help them to make a decision on how to protect themselves or helping them to protect themselves is even greater, because it requires all of us as the whole community to be reaching out and directly communicating and connecting with those individuals. And so the resource intensity of that kind of activity is much more demanding than sitting at the keyboard and writing a message. And yet that is, I believe, truly the place that you have to go to in order to directly connect with those people who are most in need of services. And this is where I step outside of my space of knowledge, and I have to point back to the work that David and Jorge do on the ground, and yourself also, Anne Marie, because you are the ones who actively work within those communities to make that last mile to meet that need. And so I guess I turn it back to you, but can I say one more thing about ChatGPT? Because that question did come up. And I'm fully in favor of using automated systems that can help us to write messages, but the work that we've done in my lab to investigate that has shown varying results. And the part of the reason is because the large language model of ChatGPT was not based upon disaster language. And so until we have trained models that utilize the language that is specific to different kinds of hazards, we don't know necessarily that the messages that come out are actually going to be about that context with the specificity that's necessary to communicate that so that people can take action. Happy to chat about that at another time, but until we've improved the models, I don't think I would ever advocate for people to rely on ChatGPT to write their messages for them.
Wise advice. So we're coming down to the end of the panel, and then I'll follow Vance's good example and just offer, if folks have any parting words or next steps, and we'll start with David.
Yeah, real quick. I would just say that what we're doing with alert and warning and groups like these getting together are really going to be kind of the catalyst of what we need to do in order to make things better. I mean, we know the gaps exist. We know that there are different things out there that may fix some of those gaps, but how do we get the word out, and how do we do the research necessary so that we can really bring back some products that really will make a difference going forward? And I think that we've done that, a step in the right direction with these symposiums. And I think that some of the additional user forums that are out there are really good. And we'll share those resources that are available that come out of When Minutes Matter and all of the other products that we have, so that you guys will have a list to be able to provide to all the participants. And thank you to all the participants for being on.
Super, yes. And just looking at the volume of questions and the number of resources mentioned, there will be a substantive communication that I know Sadie is furiously compiling as we go. So certainly, although we're coming to the end, we've got 10 more minutes, but we're coming to the end of this panel, the conversation certainly will continue. Noah, your parting thoughts, next steps. I know that Rave is committed to this discussion here. What are you all thinking of doing in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think most importantly, technology is obviously a critical component here to communicating effectively with the public. It's certainly not the panacea, but it's the vehicle that a lot of these communications travel across. I would just encourage everybody, and I think Jorge hit on it a little bit 15 or so minutes ago, work really closely with your ENS provider, get to know them, establish a relationship, and challenge us. right? Our best conversations, our best customers are those that ask us to do the hard things, that make us think differently. Certainly, we have a lot of our own ideas and we explore a lot of integrations and other technologies independent of feedback and suggestions that come from our user base. But at the end of the day, you all are the ones using the platform. You understand your gaps and challenges way better than we do. So help us help you by asking us the tough questions and challenging us. And I think that's one way in which we can all collectively communicate better and ultimately protect our communities more effectively.
For sure. And just to add, some of the comments and the questions that came up were about, including people with disabilities, access and functional needs in the planning stage, and, who's involved in developing messages, et cetera. And I think it's great to have technology partners on board as we think through, there's these different components, right? We've got the technology, and we also have the message itself and how we create it to be understandable and actionable. So definitely thank you for being such a good partner. Jorge.
Yeah, thank you. Just some parting thoughts. Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, signing up for your local jurisdiction alerts, coming to you as a local jurisdiction. Keep your information updated is critical and absolutely important. Think about the last time you moved, were you registered for your emergency alerts? Did you have a change of address, or even where you work? Because in some of these systems, you're able to add more than one address to get notified for. We found that at least 1% of our contacts become out of date every month. So it's extremely important that you keep your information up to date and you register for those mass notification systems for your local community. And also encourage everyone to get to know your neighbors and see who you might be able to help alert and let them know that there's an alert for your area, or there's something for your local neighborhood. Or you might be able to find somebody who you can call on if you need help to evacuate, or when an emergency happens. The last panel talking about evacuations, not just the one neighbor, but think about 2 or 3. The 2 that are to the side of you, the one that's across the street. Talk about where they might be going. Have an idea of letting them know where you might be going. Have that connection between neighbors, because right now, neighbor to neighbor and having that targeted outreach is crucial, and it's key, and it's that next thing that we're looking at. And for your local emergency managers, they referenced here for you from Sonoma County, and we'll make this available again in the reference links. But socoemdocs.net, SOCOEMDOCS.net, socoemdocs.net as a reference. A website there with the materials that we have information there about all our alert and warning program and things we've done here in Sonoma County. We've done exercises and things in the alert and warning space, and to find out what those gaps are. And again, really appreciative of the time, and I'm super honored to be part of this panel with these esteemed colleagues. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Dr. Sutton.
Thanks. So your question was about looking towards the future, but also thinking about resources that are out there. And I would be quite remiss if I did not mention to people the work that had been done previously out of Georgia Tech on wireless communications for access and functional needs. That was a center that was funded for 20 years. The funding was recently moved to another university, but it's a rehabilitation engineering research center for wireless inclusive technologies. And the resources on their website, which is still up, are amazing. And it talks about the policy activities that they had been involved in and the research they had done across many different kinds of access needs. And it's just a really wonderful resource for people. And I will make sure that you have that information, website information, so that you can get to it. It's one of the few academic centers that I was aware of that was doing that kind of work for a very long time. But in the future, one of the things that we talked primarily about connecting over digital devices. I'm kind of excited about the other kinds of things that are out there that are going to improve our ability to communicate beyond the device that we put in our pockets or our purses. There are so many new home-based devices, assistive devices that have this potential to increase the ability to communicate with people in a very integrated way within our homes, within our vehicles, within our daily devices we use, our televisions, our refrigerators, our air conditioning systems. My vision for 10 years from now is a hologram that speaks to us, or it enacts something, some sign language that comes out of something from the ceiling, because the future it's possible that something like this could exist, and it could improve our ability to communicate with people in ways that we can't even envision it yet. But that makes me really excited, because we have this wonderful research record that exists that we can build on, so that as we roll out new technologies, we know how to make them good from the start. And how exciting is that the future has that in hand. So if there's students on this call who want to think big about how we can move in those directions, I mean, let's have that conversation. I think that within the International Emergency Management Association, there are caucuses that are thinking about emerging technologies, and it would be a wonderful opportunity to think about how these new things can inform and enhance for the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate this panel. I'm going to turn it over to Vance to close out the first day of the National AFN Symposium. Vance.
All right. Thanks, Anne-Marie, and thank you very much to each member of that panel. That was very informative. Again, I could just engage in this for a very long time, so thank you. I hope that everybody that's participated today has enjoyed this as much as I have. As has been highlighted over and over again, speakers, moderators, panelists, one of the essential primary elements of emergency management has to be an unwavering commitment to providing equitable, accessible, quality service to every individual that gets impacted, including individuals with access and functional needs. And I think what we're hearing is that together, in partnership, we're moving the needle on this in important ways, and in ways that are meaningful. So we're going to hear more about that tomorrow, but I think that the moment of optimism for me from today is I'm looking at evacuation, that every individual has a right to evacuate their home and flee for safety in a form and fashion that is fair and equitable and accessible. Every individual has the right to life-saving information, to know what's coming, what steps to take, how to prepare, where to go. And we're moving forward down that path. But tomorrow, at the same time, we'll kick off. It'll be at 12 Eastern. You can use your same link to get on. We'll hear from Sherman Gillums. He's the director for the Office of Disability Integration and Coordination at FEMA. And we're going to hear what FEMA is doing on this effort. We're also going to hear about the incredible work that's being done to integrate access and function needs in sheltering operations. And we're going to talk about climate change impacts to the whole community and how that impacts things like inclusive recovery. So same link, same time. Thank you for coming today. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Appreciate it. Tell your friends, and we'll see you then. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.